Just what is a gravel bike in 2023? From aero racers to what some might call a mountain bike to those targeted at multi-night backpacking excursions, gravel is a broad category full of variations. That's made this year's Bike of the Year test even more challenging. Lucky for you, I've been testing gravel bikes since they were a twinkle in the eye of bike designers. For the gravel category in this year's Bike of the Year test, I pulled together a short list of 5 of the best bikes that represent the full spectrum of gravel in 2023, before putting these bikes to the test to find the top 3 gravel bikes and decide on our winner. And that's what we have here. The Giant Revolt X, the Ridley Kanzo Adventure and the Pivot Volt. But which bike from our podium takes the Gravel Bike of the Year title? First, let's take a closer look at the contenders. But before I go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsors for helping making this video possible. First up, we have Ridley's Kanzo Adventure, a machine built for gravel riding and bike packing when the going gets really rough. Then we have Giant's Revolt X, the option for taking on the gnarliest of natural bike trails. This is the bike that really starts to blur the lines between gravel and mountain bikes. How about the Pivot Volt? Well, this is a bike that offers all-day comfort with a bit of an edge on speed. A bit like an endurance bike turned up to 11. Which will be the bike for you? Let us know in the comments. Well, before we start comparing the bikes, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel and check out our 2023 Bike of the Year playlist. So how did I test the category so wide? I was looking for a gravel bike that's pure fun to ride. For me, that means it's fast and comfortable on rough terrain, but it can also mean it's a fun handling bike. Each bike was ridden on some of my favourite Salisbury Plain testing loops in the southwest of the UK through winter and the early spring. The longest day out, a 75-mile round trip to the World Heritage Site of Stonehenge and back. It takes in byways, bridleways, towpaths and a whole heap of tight and technical forest single track. This gave me a great idea of how these bikes cope with the typically varied terrain that you'll find on most British gravel rides. That's our trio of bikes, but now that they're on the shortlist, how do they compare? Let's have a look at the frames, geometry and specs before we move on to my ride impressions. Ridley's Kanzo frame is designed to be used for one-by drivetrains only, but you can specify a classified hub gear for an additional cost. The Kanzo is distinct thanks to its super low slung seat stays that are both flattened and slender to induce a bit of compliant flex and give space for huge 2.1-inch tyres with room to spare. The down tube is oversized and flows into a substantial bottom bracket shell with press fit compatibility. The frame has basically got every fitting you'd ever want to. Giant's Revolt X frame set has plenty of similarities to its suspension-free sibling. Both, for example, feature an adjustable rear end thanks to the flip chip dropouts. This means the Revolt can switch between a huge 53C maximum tyre size in the long position and a still generous 45C in the short. Then there's Giant's overdrive headset head tube design with a 1/8 inch to 1¼ inch bearings, said to keep the front end stiffness optimum. It's all wrapped up in a compact frame shape that maximises the length of exposed seat post, which has been a core design principle that has been an element in Giant's road offerings since the original TCR. However, the Revolt X has a much shorter head tube at just 145mm compared to 180 on a size large standard Revolt. This renders the Revolt X's geometry suspension corrected. The top tube's squared off and flattening shape is designed to bolster the stiffness of the head tube, but be much more compliant as it tapers back towards the junction with the seat tube. That seat tube is round and its 30.9mm diameter offers plenty of dropper post options, or you can just run a standard round post. The oversized square-shaped down tube runs into a power core bottom bracket design, an integrated oversized 86mm wide area which flows out into an asymmetrical chainstay to balance the distinct forces acting upon the back end from the drivetrain. Giant has gone against the grain when it comes to front-end integration. There's a two-piece setup with the cables and hoses routing into the head tube rather than the sort of fully integrated system now common on gravel bikes such as the Basso Palter, BMC's Kayas and Factor's Ostro Gravel. From there, they run internally to the rear brake and through to the dropper post, but there's no complexity of the proprietary integrated bar stem headset system going on here, which bodes well for upgrading the cockpit in the future. The Pivot stands out with its patented ISOFlex elastomer sleeved seat tube seat post design, which is compatible with 27.2 and 30.9 posts and even dropper posts. That means Pivot had to rethink Di2 battery placement away from the seat tube. The solution was to mount it in the down tube and access it through a port just in front of the BB386 Evo bottom bracket shell. Pivot claimed 998 grams for a medium frame with an extra 56 grams for the ISOFlex insert. At 9.09 kilograms for the unladen complete test bike in XL size, the Ridley is impressive, especially considering its big 47mm tyres. The Pivot is lighter at 8.81 kilos with its 40mm tyres and 2x Di2 drivetrain, whilst the Giant is by far the heaviest at 10.5 kilos. That said, the Giant doesn't feel heavy while riding thanks to its lightweight wheels. I'd rather carry the extra weight to experience the control and comfort of suspension. If you're a bit of a weight weenie then, the Pivot wins on the scales and it's got a bit of compliance too. However, I'd always opt for the increased rideability in the rough of the suspension equipped Revolt over weight on workshop scales. As I mentioned earlier, the Canzo is certainly prepared for thirsty work with multiple bosses on the seat tube, the top tube and the underside of the down tube. The frame also features mudguard mounts and bento box mounts on the top tube. Meanwhile, the fork has triple bosses on each leg to carry up to 3 kilos of luggage per side and internal brake hose routing plus internal routing for a dynamo cable on the other leg. The Giant looks pared down compared to the Ridley, but there's provision for bottles on the seat tube, underneath the down tube and in 2 positions on the top of the down tube to enable you to install larger size frame bags. The top tube also sees bento box bosses installed. Pivot fit the Volt with mudguard mounts, dual position bottle mounts on the down tube, bento box mounts and a removable front mech mount, making it a versatile year-round ride, but not a haulage champ like the Ridley. The Canzo's geometry is very different to most of its rivals, with a slack 70.5 degree head angle, long 415mm reach and a high 617mm stack, giving a brilliantly balanced ride with stable but not sluggish handling. A steep 74 degree seat angle helps the bike respond quickly to pedalling inputs and adds plenty to its off-road confidence. The Pivot Volt's geometry is very much at the sportier end of the gravel spectrum, with a 398mm reach and a 72 degree head angle. The double drop stay design has allowed the brand to keep the back end reasonably compact with 420mm long chainstays. That said, overall the wheelbase is still quite long at 1028mm. The 45mm fork offset combined with a 72 degree head angle whilst running 700 by 40C tyres works out as a 68mm trail. Overall, the geometry signifies a bike that should track well on rough surfaces, still be stable at speed and have a good degree of responsiveness. As I mentioned earlier, the Revolt X comes with an adjustable rear end thanks to the flip chip dropouts. The difference between the two settings isn't huge, but long gives a slightly slower, more stable reaction. The combination of a long trail, short stem and super wide gravel bar gives the Revolt X an abundance of control when the trail toughens. This, combined with a tall suspension fork and compact 145mm head tube, results in a 607mm stack on a size large. The reach of 399mm is a good long length that keeps the ride position sporty, but it's offset with a short 80mm stem to keep the handling sharp up front. The RockShox suspension fork brings a 45mm offset with a BikeRadar 45C tyre. This leads to a long 73.4mm trail. All in, this should add up to a bike with super stable steering, more suited to technical trails and fast fire roads, hard packed gravel and tarmac in between. On twisty technical single track, I can't think of a gravel bike I'd rather be on, but what would suit you best is down to what sort of gravel riding you enjoy. The Rival Explore model on our Ridley Canzo Adventure test bike features a 1044 cassette paired with a 42-tooth chainring. Rival hydraulic brakes complete the group with 160mm rotors. At the heart of the Revolt X is a mullet mix of SRAM Rival Explore Axis and GX ETAP Axis wireless mountain bike components. A single Rival Explore 42 chainring is matched to a long cage GX Axis rear derailleur and a wide range 1052 tooth cassette. Brakes come from the road gravel orientated Rival range with large 160mm rotors. It's all controlled by SRAM's Rival Axis shifters. The Pivot is driven by Shimano's excellent 12-speed Ultegra R8100 Di2 group set. It provides very smooth shifting and powerful yet controllable braking. That said, it's a very curious thing to find this road-specific group set on what's firmly a gravel bike, especially because Ultegra doesn't have any sort of change management device such as a GRX-style clutch or an Axis Explore-style damper. However, Pivot has stepped away from a Shimano chainset in favour of Praxis Zianti carbon cranks and Lever Time 2 adventure chainrings, with a small 32-tooth inner and a 48-tooth outer ring. This, combined with the widest 1134 Ultegra cassette, gives a great spread for most gravel adventures. Wheels and tyres are an essential part of a bike's performance, but it's also somewhere that brands often look to save money. Thankfully, there's none of that with the Ridley, which uses the Forza Levanto gravel wheel set. This tubeless ready carbon wheel set comes with an aero profiled 40mm deep rim that's 30mm wide externally and 23mm wide internally. The wheels are wrapped in large 47mm Vittoria Terreno dry tyres, tubeless compatible folding tyres that use Vittoria's Graphene 2.0 compound. I'd have preferred the bike to come set up tubeless rather than with standard tubes. I'd have had even more scope to lower pressures to get an additional bite, which would have helped the slick tread design cope with muddy conditions. The Revolt X features Giant's own 1,398 gram CXR1 carbon wheel set. The hookless rim is built onto Giant's own hub design, running cartridge bearings and DT Swiss 350 internals for the free hub. The wheel set reacts well with its stiff feel, and the 54-point engagement from the DT Swiss free hub internals means snappy acceleration when you put in a big effort. The design has a gravel optimized 25mm internal width, which blunts the 30mm deep external profile. Unlike Ridley, Giant has set up the tyres tubeless out of the box. The tyres are Giant's own crosscut grip 1 in a 45mm width. These have a light knobble tread through the midsection and more pronounced knobs on the shoulders to aid cornering grip. Pivot uses the DT Swiss CR 1600 wheel set for the Volt. The low 23mm rim depth and tubeless ready design with a 22mm internal width is reasonably up to date, though at 1730 grams a pair, it's a middleweight wheel set. Although it offers good bang for buck in isolation, I feel somewhat shortchanged on an £8,000 bike. The wheels are wrapped with Maxxis capable Rambler tubeless tyres in a 40C size. They come set up tubeless too. Ridley's finishing kit is solid stuff. The highlight is a wide 44cm Ritchie Venture Max 2 gravel bar, made even wider at the drops with its 24-degree flare. At the back is a similarly simple round 27.2 diameter seat post. This is topped by Celio Italia's XLR saddle. Giant's Revolt X uses a short 80mm Giant alloy stem that clamps onto Giant's Contact SL XR D-Fuse bar with a 16-degree flare and a generous 48cm width. This bar was excellent on technical trails. Giant's Approach SL saddle is held in place by Postmodern's 30.9mm diameter dropper post combined with a drop bar mounted remote controller. The post drops 100mm at the push of the lever, but cleverly it also acts like a suspension post with 25mm of travel when fully extended. Pivot opts for an alloy Easton EA70AX bar and the alloy pivot stem. These are good quality components. I like that the bar's compact drop has a more subtle flare than most gravel specific bars, which makes the pivot feel more road bike-like when on the tarmac. WTB's comfortable and hard-wearing saddle is made especially for pivot, and it sits atop the 27.2 diameter carbon pivot seat post. With a 40mm travel suspension fork plus a remote control dropper post with 25mm of suspension and 100mm of drop, Giant's Revolt X is the only bike here with front and rear compliance. Pivot has its elastomer infused rear seat post arrangement, which does an excellent job of keeping your rear comfortable. So if suspension is your thing, as I think it's fast becoming mine, the Giant wins here. On paper, £4,459 or $6,469, the Canzo Adventure is compelling when it comes to relative value. This rival Explore drivetrain and carbon wheel specification comes with a price tag that's over £1,800 cheaper than Specialized Crux Expert in a very similar build. Compared to its rivals with effectively 40mm of suspension at the front end and 25mm at the rear, the Revolt X represents great value for money at £5,499 or $6,200. The Pivot Volt doesn't do so well on the value front. This Ultegra Di2 version does come cheap at £8,000 or $6,699. Such a price should bring a near top tier spec list, but a few of the component choices are underwhelming. There's an alloy bar fitted where I'd expect to see carbon at this kind of price. The WTB saddle is comfortable and hard wearing, but feels basic. And the DT Swiss wheel set is a sub £700 option that just doesn't belong on an £8,000 bike. Ridley set out to create a bike capable of handling serious terrain, and the Canzo Adventure certainly does that. The Canzo Adventure is simply formidable on fast, loose gravel descents, smooth in tight turns and rooty, rocky surfaces. It never feels anything less than planted underneath you. With the Pivot, I was somewhat sceptical about the Isoflex sleeved seat post design. Compared to its more complex rivals, it seemed a bit low-tech. But it works brilliantly. The back end of the Volt feels taut, short and nimble thanks to the compact chainstays, yet it's all wrapped up in compliant cushioning that makes a real difference up through the saddle. On fast, wide gravel roads with plenty of ruts and bumps to traverse, it's rapid. It's not quite in the same league as the aero-optimized BMC Caius or Factor Austro gravel, but it's really not that far behind. It's when the going gets technical that the Pivot gets out in front. It becomes nimble and playful, delivering plenty of controlled confidence, even encouraging me to take more extreme lines. The Rudy Ultimate Fork might provide only 40mm of travel, but it uses it to stunning effect, swallowing up high frequency, energy sapping vibrations with ease. Ruts and roots are nulled well too. You'll still feel them, but they won't jar. So for fast, untechnical routes, I'd go Pivot. For twisty, tough tracks carrying luggage, it's the Ridley. But for everything, everywhere, all at once, the only choice is the Revolt X. The Ridley climbs brilliantly thanks to the stability of the handling combined with a sub 1-to-1 lowest gear. The steep seat angle and long wheelbase help to grab all the potential traction when the going gets steep, and the ultralight lowest gear means you'll keep pedaling when those around you will be resorting to hiking. The Volt, meanwhile, is also great on the climbs with its subtle vibration damping combining well with the oversized bottom bracket. In theory, Giant's extra weight should put it at a disadvantage on the climbs, but it simply doesn't. With the lightweight wheel set and their fast pickup, it climbs with the same liveliness as a true featherweight gravel bike. The Ridley descends on dirt superbly, and the 4210 top gear means you can reach scary speeds on fire roads and wide open gravel descents. The Ridley swoops through corners and swallows up surface imperfections. This composure makes it a blast to ride fast downhill, using all the compliance from those big tyres. The pivot on smoother dirt or even road descents excels, using the 40C tyre volume to smooth the way. The stability of the bike helps to keep speed high, though I wasn't a massive fan of using it for twisty technical stuff. The Giant, however, is the king of off-road descending. The combination of the long trail, short stem and super wide gravel bar gives the Revolt X an abundance of control when the trail toughens. It's composed yet flickable, tracks online but can be snapped into action quickly. It's simply one of the most fun gravel bikes I've ever ridden. In short, when the gravel route ahead turns to twisty, technical single track, I can't think of another gravel bike I'd rather be on. In a wide range of prices of the bikes tested, the Pivot sits in the middle ground, although it is the most expensive of the final three. And it's hugely comfortable and smooth, partly due to its winning seat tube seat post design, yet it remains rapid on both trails and the blacktop. For that £8,000 outlay, however, I'd expect to see a higher level of wheels, saddle and bars. It's the two least expensive bikes that brought the most fun to the all-terrain table, however, with both the Ridley and the Giant my picks for venturing onto technical trails and the real rough stuff. The Ridley is the bike to plumb for if you want to carry your campsite with you and still enjoy all the fun of the trails. The Revolt X, however, is the bike that's at its best when you're riding on the limit or you want to properly push them. The suspension, both front and rear, aren't about squashing big drops or heavy landings, but they'll give you heaps more control over rough terrain and will keep you fresher for longer on long days out. While understandably, neither of these dirt-focused machines excel on tarmac, the Giant is no slouch on the asphalt, which sees it edge 2023's best gravel bike title. That, and with its suspension at both ends, its fun factor off-road on the toughest, roughest surfaces simply kept me smiling. In fact, I might just take it out on one last big ride before Giant comes calling for its return. Do you agree with my winner? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you like independent reviews, and if you want even more gravel bikes, why not watch this next?